Today, we're going to get into the long, powerful, and honestly, pretty complex story behind the fight for women's rights. It's a movement that has literally reshaped the world we live in, but you might be surprised to find out that its beginnings were a lot quieter than you'd think. So, let's dive in. So let me ask you this. How does a revolution actually start? A massive shift in how we all see the world. It's a huge question, right? And it's really the question that's going to guide us through this whole explainer. Does it kick off with a big protest, a war, or is it something else? Well, sometimes it starts way more quietly than that. It can all begin with just one single, powerful question. A question that challenges the very foundation of how things are. A question so sharp that you just can't ignore it. Like this one, ain't I a woman? Think about that. In 1851, Sojourner Truth, who had escaped slavery, stood up and asked that very question. And with those four words, she wasn't just challenging sexism. She was also calling out the racism within the anti-slavery movement itself. She was demanding rights for all women. It's just a perfect example of a question that cuts right to the heart of an injustice. But a question that powerful doesn't just pop up out of nowhere, right? It's built on decades of people thinking and writing and laying the groundwork. So let's rewind a bit and trace it all back to the very first whispers of equality and the few brave thinkers who started to question everything. And this right here, this contrast, says it all. On one side, you have the standard view in the 18th century. Women were seen as just less than men. Their place was in the home, period. But then this explosive new idea starts bubbling up. What if women aren't inferior? What if they're just uneducated? And this radical idea was being pushed by some absolute pioneers. Over in England, you had Mary Wollstonecraft laying it all out in her writing back in 1792. And at the same time in France, Olympe de Gouges was even more direct. She demanded the exact same rights for women that the French Revolution had just claimed for men. I mean, for their time, this was just mind-blowing stuff.
Okay, so ideas are great. They're the spark. But a spark isn't a fire. You need action to make real change happen. So how did these philosophical whispers grow into an organized roar, a real movement demanding concrete changes?
Well, you can kind of see the momentum building right here. Now, it took more than 50 years, but those intellectual seeds planted by thinkers like Wollstonecraft, they finally started to blossom into actual organized activism. Things built up kind of slowly, and then all at once, leading to this huge turning point. And that turning point was the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. It was organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, and it was a huge deal. It was the first time women had ever gathered on this scale to really fight for their own equality. It's pretty much considered the official birth of the women's rights movement here in the U.S. At that convention, they drafted this document called the Declaration of Sentiments. And let me tell you, their demands were sweeping. This was not just about getting the right to vote. No way. They wanted control of their own money. They wanted the chance to go to college. And they wanted to fix divorce laws that were just completely stacked against them. They were fighting for full personhood. But you gotta wonder, why was this all so necessary in the first place? To really get that, we need to look past the historical events for a minute and check out a few key ideas, let's call them lenses, that help explain the really deep roots of all this inequality. So let's try looking at this whole fight through three different lenses. First, you've got liberal feminism. The basic idea here is that the main problem is unfair laws. So the goal is to change the system from the inside to get women the same access to everything that men have. Simple enough. Then there's Marxist feminism. This view says, whoa, hold on, the problem is way deeper. It's economic. It argues that capitalism itself is built on women's unpaid work in the home. And finally, intersectional feminism comes in and adds this really crucial layer. It reminds us that you can't just look at gender. You have to see how it connects and overlaps with race, class, and everything else. And this concept of intersectionality is a total game changer. The term was first coined by the scholar Kimberly Crenshaw. And it's all about recognizing that your identity is made up of all these overlapping parts. So, for example, a Black woman faces a unique mix of sexism and racism that's totally different from what a white woman experiences. It just shows us there isn't one single woman's experience. There are many, many different ones. And all of that brings us right up to today. Because let's be clear, this fight is far from over. The movement keeps evolving, facing brand new challenges and coming up with new strategies for the road ahead. And the challenges that remain they're significant. It seems like for every step forward, there's always this intense backlash.
You've got these cultural norms that are just so deeply ingrained, plus the economic gaps that just won't seem to close. These things act like anchors, holding progress back. This isn't ancient history we're talking about. This is a very real present-day struggle.
So, what's the path forward? Well, the strategies today are coming from all different angles. Of course, it means continuing to push for better education and legal reforms. But it also means doing the hard cultural work, changing the stories we tell in movies and media. And crucially, it means getting men and boys on board as real allies in taking apart these old structures.
So we started this whole thing by asking how a revolution begins. We've seen how it can start with just a question and how that question can grow into a movement that evolves with new ideas and new strategies. The story of women's rights has had so many chapters, from essays written by candlelight to global movements online. The final question, then, is really for all of us. What will the next chapter be?